The recent U.S. airstrikes in Syria mark a decisive turning point in Washington's military posture in the Middle East, after years of limited engagement, containment strategies, and indirect pressure. The United States has once again chosen direct kinetic action, signaling that the Syrian theater is far from frozen. These strikes were not symbolic. They were calculated, targeted, and politically loaded. According to American officials, the operation followed the killing of U.S. personnel by ISIS-linked cells operating in eastern Syria. But stopping at that explanation would miss the deeper strategic logic behind this move. For several years, the United States has tried to maintain a low-visibility presence in Syria, focused on counterterrorism, intelligence gathering, and supporting local partners. The assumption was that ISIS had been territorially defeated and reduced to a manageable insurgency. That assumption is now visibly collapsing. ISIS has not returned as a state-like entity, but it has adapted into a decentralized network capable of lethal attacks, recruitment, and psychological warfare. The killing of American personnel crossed a red line because it challenged the credibility of U.S. deterrence, not just in Syria, but across the entire region. This strike must also be understood in the context of American domestic politics and global signaling. Washington is under pressure to demonstrate strength after a series of global crises that have tested U.S. credibility, from Ukraine to the South China Sea. A restrained response would have been interpreted as weakness, not only by ISIS, but by state actors watching closely, including Iran, Russia, and Turkey. By striking swiftly, the U.S. is reinforcing a message that it will respond forcefully when its personnel are targeted, regardless of geography. However, the deeper story is not ISIS alone. Syria today is a crowded battlefield of overlapping interests. Iran-backed militias operate alongside Syrian government forces. Russian assets remain embedded in key bases. Turkish forces control northern zones, while Kurdish-led groups maintain autonomy with American backing. Any U.S. strike risks escalation or miscalculation in this highly congested environment. That is precisely why this operation matters. It shows that Washington is willing to accept escalation risk to reassert control over the rules of engagement. According to U.S. defense briefings reported by major American newspapers, the targets included logistical hubs, weapons storage facilities, and command nodes linked to ISIS operations. This suggests a strategic aim beyond retaliation. The goal appears to be degrading ISIS's operational depth and signaling that its reorganization phase will not be tolerated. Yet history offers a warning. Airstrikes alone have never eliminated insurgent movements. They disrupt, delay, and deter, but they also create power vacuums that other actors exploit. There is also a regional dimension that cannot be ignored. Iran has steadily expanded its influence in eastern Syria, using militia networks and supply routes connecting Iraq to Lebanon. Any destabilization in these areas affects Iranian logistics, even if Iran is not the direct target. Russia, for its part, benefits from portraying the U.S. as an occupying force violating Syrian sovereignty, a narrative it will likely amplify. Turkey remains concerned about Kurdish empowerment, which could intensify if U.S. involvement increases. This raises a critical question. Is the United States drifting back into a deeper Middle Eastern commitment without openly acknowledging it? Official statements insist there is no change in mission, yet actions suggest otherwise. Increased strikes require intelligence, surveillance, logistics, and force protection. That means more resources, more exposure, and more risk. The U.S. may be entering a phase of incremental escalation, where each response creates conditions for the next. From ISIS's perspective, provoking the United States can be strategically useful. Attacking American forces draws attention, fuels recruitment narratives, and frames the group as a resilient actor fighting a global superpower. This dynamic has played out before in Iraq and Afghanistan. The challenge for Washington is to strike hard enough to deter further attacks without feeding the very narrative ISIS thrives on. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the erosion of diplomatic buffers. Communication channels between the U.S. and Russia are thinner than they were years ago. Regional trust is low. Misinterpretation is more likely. A single strike gone wrong could spiral into a broader confrontation, even if no actor actually wants escalation. Looking ahead, several scenarios emerge. In the short term, ISIS activity may temporarily decline as networks go underground. In the medium term, retaliation attempts against US or allied forces are likely. In the long term, unless there is a political settlement in Syria and sustained pressure on extremist financing and recruitment, the cycle will repeat. Military force can suppress symptoms, but it does not cure the disease. The most important takeaway is this: the Syrian conflict is not over. It has merely entered a quieter, more complex phase where non-state actors, proxy forces, and great power competition intersect. The US airstrikes are a reminder that stability in the Middle East remains fragile, and that decisions made in one night can reshape strategic calculations for years. According to coverage by American and international outlets such as Spectrum News, The New York Times, and Reuters, this operation reflects a broader reassessment within the Pentagon about permissive environments and acceptable risk. Whether this marks the beginning of a sustained campaign or a one-off warning shot will depend on what happens next. But one thing is clear: Syria is back on Washington's strategic radar, and the consequences will not be confined to its borders.